Hello, and welcome to my channel, Virochana Asura. The subject of this video will be a chart analysis of the United States birth chart. To accomplish this, we will be using very basic techniques of Vedic astrology to explore the astrological schematic of the American psyche. The time used is July 4th, 1776 at 1200 hours in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The ascendant is Virgo at 18 degrees, and on the ascendant is Neptune at 1 degrees and Saturn at 24 degrees in a loose conjunction. Analysis. President Harding famously said, "The business of America is business." In this, he was channeling our ascendant lord, the planet Mercury. This is the planet of commerce, communication, and games. While there is some historical debate about the actual relevance of the 4th of July, and even more obscurity over the time of the declaration, the best indication that I could come up with is that at roughly noon on this date is when the actual declaration occurred and the beginning of the United States. Also, this is generally accepted that this is the date. This would make sense because it would make Mercury the ascendant lord of the United States and the sign Virgo, which also matches. The first factor to examine is the state of the ascendant lord. He is placed in the sign of his enemy, the moon, and is conjunct with the north mode of the moon, the malefic Rahu. A strong positive influence on him is coming from the lunar mansion or nakshatra where he sits, which is ruled by Saturn, who is well placed on the ascendant in this chart. He is strongly influenced by Rahu, who is considered favorably placed, from what I found, in Cancer. His position is thus mixed, and his results will vary depending upon the transits and how he is aspected by other planets as they move through the chart. It will also depend on his house placement in each transit. Also, at 03 degrees, he is young and not fully mature in his ability to create effects within the chart. Because he is in the 11th house of gains, this will be his primary focus. This is an auspicious number placement for the ascendant lord, so that may help him in other aspects where he is weak. The nakshatra of the ascendant sign, which is strong at 18 degrees, is Hasta. Its ruler, the moon, is in a neutral sign, and the ruler of Virgo is mixed, so this lunar asterism will generate its full range of both positive and negative effects depending on transits. Hasta is very much concerned with the power of manifestation. This can generate an industrious, hardworking, and service-oriented disposition with a strong mind. Saturn on the ascendant will support this energy. There is also an impetus towards self-improvement. We see this reflected in the natural health and fitness movements which periodically appear in American culture. On the other hand, this can create a rather Jesuitical mind, which is thievish and cunning. This might explain the presence of so many lawyers in the United States. The hallmark of the Virgo ascendant, is practicality. Virgo is also the sign of healing, which we could read in some ways as problem solving. This is reflected in the focus of the famous Yankee ingenuity. This is a sign which likes to be productive, and because this is ruled by Mercury, this will usually be done through business. Virgo is detail-focused and does like to control outcomes. On the negative side, there is a tendency to be fussy and to be overly self-critical, even something of a hypochondriac. This sort of empiricism is very much a part of the American personality. On the other side, there can be at times a rather morbid self-castigation over past sins of the country, far more than, say, a Frenchman or a Mexican would engage in generally in their societies, for example. However, this same self-criticism can be healing and solve problems such as the abolitionist movement in the 19th century and the civil rights movement of the 20th century. The natural hypochondria of this sign can be found in a number of ways throughout America's cultural history. Just two examples. In the 19th century, there was this focus on female hysteria, and in the 1980s, the Satanic Panic. This conjunction of Neptune and Saturn could be seen as bring the vision into the real world, thus being the impetus of the first house. On one hand, this is the Horatio Alger myth. Through hard work, you can attain the American dream. Because Neptune is out of place in this sign, however, the desire to make the vision into a reality when it is not realistic can lead to an imbalanced view and frustration. This is where Mars aspect on this can be manifest. One thinks of prohibition and also the enforced niceness of the modern political correct movements as manifestations of this imbalanced dynamic. Because he is mixed, Mercury will flow between these and support both sides. Mercury is also value neutral. Finally, as the conjunction is a loose one, with the planets being more than 10 degrees apart, they will also function strongly individually. Saturn here is well placed as he is in a friend sign, Mercury, although he is being aspected by his enemy Mars, but since Mars is at a low degree, this is not that great. Saturn's presence on the ascendant means his influence is prominent in the national personality, if you will. This can create a stoic, responsible, and down-to-earth, hard-working personality. This is the classic pull yourself up by your bootstraps philosophy of America. It's also an emphasis on delayed gratification. You work and save, and then someday, you can, go to Atlantic City, but just gamble a little. Saturn in Chitra can generate discipline and an intelligence of an architectural type. On its dark side, Chitra is connected with magicians and masters of illusion. Manifested through Saturn in the sign of Mercury, these would be closely connected with the master of illusion himself, Rahu. These magicians then would be the elite of commerce and banking, those whom F. William Engdahl, in his famous and highly recommended book called The Gods of Money. The poorly placed Mars may manifest in such a manner through this asterism. Neptune is the visionary and idealistic side. This is the famous city on a hill, often cited in American political rhetoric. But he is uncomfortable in the detail-oriented world of the bean-counting Virgo. However, he may emphasize more of the healing side of the sign. In the conjunction, he holds the lowest degree, hence he is the foundation. Neptune is in the lunar mansion of Uttara Phalguni, which is ruled by the sun. The sun is in an enemy sign in this chart. This can give courage, especially in sight for social causes which will support Neptune's idealism. The dark side has a trait similar to Chitra in that it can manifest in the dark world of the occult. How this would influence Neptune here might be the use of ideology and belief systems for manipulation. This same trait is found in Ketu in this chart that is gazing at the Ascendant and hence reinforcing it. Because these influences are mostly in the lunar mansions, it may be that they are more of an undercurrent in the American psyche. Another way to read this is that they work behind the scenes. To mention some of the aspects already alluded to, Ketu in Capricorn is bringing his influence for a natural bent for leadership, but also a focus on the karmic past of the country, continuing to aspect the Ascendant. Perhaps this is part of what is driving the continual self-criticism over historical sins. Mars' first aspect looking at this house can agitate this tendency towards criticism as well as the national hypochondria. The ruler of the 6th house is in the 1st house here, which is Saturn. This will create a sense of service and a desire to protect others. Because this is Saturn, this will mean the less privileged and workers. This can also create an emphasis on law under the influence of Saturn's traditional behavior. But Neptune, in his negative aspect on this, can also create sort of illusions regarding this. The 2nd house is Libra. The ruler of this sign is 10 degrees from the sun and hence right on the border of combustion, which is Venus. However, Venus is in a friend sign and receiving an aspect from his friend Saturn, so his results will vary. The 2nd house is that of wealth and resources. It also represents exploration and management of material resources. Libra is the sign of stability and balance, which is beneficial as the 2nd house in a chart. Because this is the sign of Venus, he will want to create comfort and luxury with these resources. Libra is a good sign for business. That side of it will be supported by the Ascendant Lord Mercury. This would indicate that the country will gain resources through business. It may also mean that the country will prosper through diplomacy, which is a trait of Venus. This house is also receiving an unfavorable aspect from the enemy of Venus, Jupiter, although this may be mitigated because he is the natural ruler of this house. During periods of Jupiter's effects through transit or aspects in the chart, as it unfolds his negative aspect on Venus, it may affect the stability of Venus and stability of Libra, and luxury. It may mean that the country will need to manage its resources well and avoid a sense of over-optimism or idealism that can lead to imbalance or mismanagement under the effects of Jupiter's combustion. Jupiter is close to the sun and combust in this chart. It may also expand the Venusian desire for luxury to a detrimental degree, leading to a destructive self-indulgence in the economic life of the nation. Such an effect was as seen, for example, in the Gilded Age of the Rubber Barons. This might also indicate that the business cycle of the nation will be ruled by the interplay of Venus and Jupiter. 3rd house, Scorpio. The ruler of this sign is Mars, and he is poorly placed in an enemy sign and at a low degree. A weak and annoyed Mars does not always mean that he has weak effects. It can also mean that he will have an imbalanced attitude towards conflict or may be aggressive. As this is his house, that especially needs to be taken into consideration. This house governs mentality, curiosity, and research. This is also the house of prowess, and it reveals our courage and boldness of action. Mars can bring energy and aggression into this house. That Mars is not well placed may mean that he can have an imbalanced attitude towards aggression and will feel the need to prove himself in a fight, especially since he is weak on a low degree. Research as indicated Mars here in his own sign of Scorpio will be research into Martian matters, particularly those which are active and are kept from public view, as this is Scorpio. One of these is war. The United States has long been a leader in armaments development and export. This may also involve other Martian matters such as heavy industry. Regarding the aspects, Saturn is an enemy of Mars, so his aspect looking at this house will not necessarily be beneficial. Rahu will bring an additional dimension to this influence. Another association with the third house is siblings. On a national scale, this would mean aggression towards allies or even subterfuge, being Scorpio, and commercial exploitation, given that Rahu's aspect is here, echoing Mercury. Our siblings would be, we might consider, the younger Latin American republics which began to win their freedom from the Spanish Empire under Fernando VII in 1821. Historically, this house is in our national chart is affecting them. One example of that would be in the construction of the Panama Canal and the treatment of the United States, while in many other ways I like Theodore Roosevelt, of Colombia. Fourth house, Sagittarius. The ruler of this house is Jupiter, who is in an enemy sign and is combust. The fourth house is the house of family and home. It is also the emotional environment and can represent the mother in personal charts. In this case, it would represent the physical space of the country because this is both our home and our mother. Sagittarius is the sign of higher learning and one's philosophical and religious outlook on life. Aspects. Besides Jupiter, there are 4 other aspects looking at this house, so there is a large amount of energy focused here, even though there are no planets in this house in the chart. The activity of the 10th house in Gemini with 4 planets in conjunction is reflected here as well. The 10th house has a great deal of tension, which is reflected onto this space. The physical land will be important then for matters of career and success. Venus. Venus aspecting the 4th house can create a sense of patriotism and a desire to nurture the homeland. When affecting this sign, Venus can create a love of travel and to meet and encounter different types of people. The interplay of these factors might be seen in the melting pot and the desire to incorporate different peoples into the homeland. Mercury. Mercury looking at the 4th house will give an interest in learning about the environment. Because he is aspecting this sign, it may be particularly through higher education. The positive side of this would be seen, for example, in the travels of William Bartram around the period of the Revolution, and later of Lewis and Clark. Since his emphasis is profit in the 11th house, he will always have this angle towards the land. This can potentially create a conflict with a Venusian impetus to nurture the land and to regard it idealistically. Additionally, since Mercury is mixed and with Rahu, the darker side of this aspect is exploitation of natural resources and using science, technology in negative ways, such as GMOs. The sun looking at the 4th house can give a very active life driven to build up resources. When aspecting Sagittarius, there is an ideological bent and a love of freedom and open spaces. This was an important part of the energy, for example, governing the westward expansion and search of these qualities. Jupiter will naturally expand all of these factors within the 4th house. This is his own sign as well. When Jupiter aspects the 4th house, he will bring an emphasis on agriculture and land dealings. In Sagittarius, he would generally have a thoughtful and even philosophical treatment of this land management and agriculture. However, he is poorly placed in combust. This could create unrealistic optimism about the issues as well as an overly idealized view of nature. One way we have seen this historically is the settlement of the prairie. Exaggerated ideas of the land and the potential to build up homesteads, a 4th house issue, were sold to the public. Now, because of their poor land management, it created the Dust Bowl. One can see the involvement of Mercury and Rahu here as well, but it was an example of the effects of the combust Jupiter in the chart. Another example of this is the militant environmentalist groups, which will kill one animal who is of their own species, man, to save another because of their idealized projections onto the other animals. Mars aspecting the 4th house will tend to express his side as the significator of real estate. When looking at Sagittarius, he will manifest an adventurous and pioneering spirit. This harmonizes and reinforces the sun's similar influence in this house. Since both Mars and the sun are agitated in this chart, this will create conflicts over land. Since the sun's enemy Venus is also present, I would read this as struggles with other peoples, so this would indicate here the American Indians. Because such a struggle is occurring in Sagittarius, it will be given a very moral and religious overtone. Because Mercury is here, we will see more of this when studying 11th house, this high rationality will really be just part of a commercial game. The 5th house is Capricorn. Ketu sits in this house at 16 degrees. The ruler of Capricorn is Saturn, who is well placed in a friend sign and prominent on the ascendant, so this is a strong house in the chart. Capricorn is a desire to succeed. It is a patient and resourceful sign, but it can also be dictatorial. The 5th house is that of, among other things, progeny. Ketu in Capricorn can bring a natural bent towards leadership and an inherent sense of structure that would be reinforced by Saturn on the ascendant. This creates the sort of leadership which is focused on problem solving. Ketu here will tend to be innovative. However, he can give sudden ups and downs in regard to these very same areas and bring periods of incompetent leadership. Also, because he is in the 5th house, he can create generational conflicts. Pardon me. The shadow planet also reflects past life karmas. It is a long discussion of how this might manifest as the past of the country, such as in this chart. One could certainly see a connection with the Pilgrim Fathers through Capricorn. However, in his aspects, he will bring those influences of this house and this past karma onto the ascendant, based most likely through the historical actions of the country itself as it unfolds. The lunar asterism in which he sits is Shravana, and this is ruled by Ketu's enemy, the moon. This can create a desire to connect with spiritual matters and things which are of a higher nature, but given that it is linked to the enemy of Ketu, the moon, it may also be seen as cults, especially those which are withdrawn from society because Ketu likes to be detached. Or it may represent outlandish doctrines from the vantage point of Orthodox faiths. So we see this reflected in the utopian movements of the 19th century and of the 1960s, as well as movements such as the Mormons and the Quakers. There has always been a strong influence of presence of cults in America. The natural indicator of this house of Jupiter, who is poorly placed and combust, it should be noted. Mars' aspect here can support leadership ability, but it can also play a role in agitating conflicts between generations because this is the 5th house of children. He can also agitate sudden changes. The most recent example of this generational conflict would be the baby boomers. Another example would be the major paradigm shift, which was that of the lost generation after World War I. Sixth house, Aquarius. The moon is at 3 degrees. The ruler of this sign is Saturn, who is well placed in the chart. This is thus a strong house. Aquarius is the sign of independence and innovation. It is also a sign which focuses on community. The moon is the mind, or in this chart, we might say the national mentality. The moon in Aquarius is the most individualistic in the zodiac, and this is reflected in the national self-image. There is also a great interest in technology and whatever is innovative. This is the love of gadgets and the excitement and emotional investment in new technology. Another side of the moon is that, pardon me, another side of the moon is that it can have a very reformist streak. There can be a tension between the individualistic and the altruistic mentalities reflected in American culture. There are times when movements such as the Women's Christian Temperance League will wax across the national mentality, while at other times this will wane, and the phases of the Roaring 20s and the Go-Go 90s will be the ones that are waxing strong. Both of these reflect Aquarius. This is parallel to the Neptune-Saturn dialectic on the Ascendant, and we can see that this will support this type of dynamic. This is the 6th house, which is that of enemies and illness, also debt. The moon in this house can be service-oriented with the desire to bring these matters to their ideal point. When combined with the innovation, which is an aspect of the sign, this tends to create a belief that technology is what is going to help us reach that ideal state. In other words, if we just produce enough, if we just invent something new, it will solve it. We can see this reflected in the mythology of Star Trek, for example. On the downside, it can represent emotional swings, bouts of confusion, and poor spending habits. That seems to be what we're in the grips of at this time. Because the moon has no supporting aspects and it is a low degree and waning, there will be national periods of depression and confusion. The moon is in Danishta, which is the show me moon, which is of course the motto of Middle America and the show me state of of Missouri. It can be difficult to convince this moon of anything. It is also a moon which can be rash in reaching opinions. The shadow side of this nakshatra is materialism and greed. Because of Mars' placement, he may give an aggressive and argumentative bent to this, thus creating a streak of obstinacy and unwillingness to change opinions. Mars, who is the indicator of debt, will also drive the national mentality and this desire to satisfy greed. On a more positive side, this can create the sort of rugged individualism which is a staple image of traditional American culture. Here in this house, the ruler of the 11th house is in the 6th. This will create opportunities in the medical and legal fields. So here we find again our national propensity to lawyers. It also gives an interest in the military. All of these will be used by the moon as ways of actualizing whatever phase the moon is going through. So if it's in its more humanitarian phase, it will want to develop these tendencies of the military, law, and medicine in that degree. Or if it's in a more individualistic and selfish stage, then it's going to orient them towards that, but it will try to have a moral rationale at the very least. The 7th house in this chart is Pisces. Jupiter is the ruler of this sign. Because he is poorly placed and combust, he is damaged. The natural indicator of this house is also in a mixed state. The 7th house indicates all important, relationships. Being 10th from the 10th, the public image and attainment of position can also be reflected here. As this refers to the nation, this would touch on diplomatic relations of the country and treaties as well. Jupiter is governing these alliances, but they're also happening in the sign of Pisces, which is that of the deep waters. This is the natural 12th house. Thus, there's going to be a murky or a concealed side of American diplomatic relations. Now, we could also go out on a limb and stretch this and say that the murky, deep, and hidden and dark waters could also be oil. The seventh house also relates to business partnerships. Thus, on a national level, this could be read as international business and treaties, applying to relations as well. Because Jupiter indicates wealth and expansion, this will be a house which Jupiter will use to generate wealth and expand American influence. Because of his combustion, this may manifest in the idea that we know everything and we don't need to listen to anyone. This can bring an arrogant quality to relationships, especially as this Jupiter will always feel himself to be morally superior. This is where we find the infamous ugly American. An example of this may also be found in the overthrow of the Iranian Prime Minister Mossadegh in 1953. The Mercury subterranean issue and reason was oil politics, but it was done with a sense of moral superiority and imposing democracy on Iran, claiming that the prime minister was a corrupt tyrant. But it was the real tyrant which replaced him. This is a classic example of Jupiter combust, acting through the seventh house. Jupiter can also create over-optimism in relations and diplomatic ties and treaties. A good example of this, which is more recent than Mossadegh, would be NAFTA. This was supposed to produce wonderful effects which were grossly overestimated, when in fact it has been a disaster. This house is receiving aspects from both Rahu and Saturn. Because the Jupiterian energy is here and has the ability to control Rahu, depending on how Jupiter is doing through transits, Rahu may not always have a negative aspect on this house. But because of his combustion, he's not going to always be able to do this. Thus, there are periods when Rahu can project his malefic nature onto this house, especially if Rahu has a house placement or a lunar mansion or nakshatra through which he is transiting, which will emphasize that. Jupiter and Saturn are neutral towards each other. Thus, Saturn may slow the matters of this house down or bring a structural, maybe a legal aspect, possibly the influence of banking, which generally, speaking personally, is pretty malefic. But that may also bring this onto these relations. The 8th house in this chart is Aries. The ruler of the 8th house is thus Mars. He is poorly placed in an enemy sign. He is also at a low degree. The 8th house is that which is hidden, and it is also sudden ups and downs. The hidden side of life is vice and conspiracies. It can also be the finances of others. That this is ruled by Mars indicates that these are areas where there could be sharp reversals of highs and lows, which will occur specifically in Martian spheres. Mars represents industrial technologies, mineral resources, real estate, and war. His agitation with these means, as said, that there could be sharp changes in these areas. That this is the sign specifically of Aries indicates that these are related to pioneering, adventuring, and executive abilities. Saturn is the natural indicator of this house, and this may mean that we are seeing administrators reflected here, thus reinforcing the reading that this is referring to executives. This may be of the government or large corporations, but it may also mean that it's a strong inflection referring to the presidents of the United States. The agitated Mars may mean that there may be violence and extremes, as well as sudden reversals. We've also seen this regarding ups and downs of leadership, so under the influence of Ketu, so Mars will reinforce this. I think this is an open question if this is referring to assassinations. That is certainly very probable. This would require a dissection of this house with the DA chart. That naturally is beyond the scope of this current study. The ninth house of this chart is Taurus. Uranus is placed there at 18 degrees. The ruler of the ninth house here is Venus. He is in a friend sign, but in a mixed conjunction with his enemy, the Sun. Thus, he will give varied and mixed results. Uranus can bring a chaotic energy to the practical and conservative matters of Taurus, which are centered on areas of finance, business, and in general materiality. The planet here can create swings in financial fortune, often with sudden and unpredictable reversals. Again, this is repeating a pattern that we have seen through the chart. He will also disrupt conservative attitudes. However, once this becomes congealed and focused, there is no force which can stand in the way, especially as this is an earth sign, which will be more oriented towards materialization of this in the actual world. The ninth house is that of higher teachings and beliefs. Uranus is rebellious in this house. This reinforces, as we see, aspects of the moon, which is individualistic in Aquarius. Again, another pattern. He has a reformist streak looking to upset the status quo. After the American Revolution, the Taurian matters of the nation and finance and business expressed in this sign were ruled by the revolutionary ideas of free trade capitalism in a world which was dominated by mercantilism. In a later era, we find this manifest in Jackson's conflicts with the banks in the early 1830s and the long national debates over the backing of money, which was only settled in 1913 with the creation of the Federal Reserve. I am fighting my deep temptation to comment on that, but I won't. Even further on, this revolutionary aspects in this matters were seen after the Great Depression. We have the New Deal in the 1930s. But this influence reaches even further, manifesting as a desire to be self-sufficient and independent from outside control. Uranus is sitting in the lunar mansion of Rohini. The power of the nakshatra Rohini is that at its most basic aspect of growth. Thus, this will support the activities of Uranus. The rebellious side of Uranus under the light of this asterism may manifest specifically artistically. This we can see from the pamphlets of Thomas Paine in the colonial era through to the novels of Upton Sinclair. Or one thinks of films such as One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Easy Rider. Ketu's first aspect on this house can bring a natural sense of leadership to these areas, and that may help to focus them. But it can also bring concern and center them on areas of past national karma. 10th house, Gemini. Mars is at 0 degrees here, Venus at 12 degrees, Jupiter at 15 degrees, and the Sun at 22 degrees, forming a conjunction of 4 planets. The planetary ruler of this house is Mercury, who is placed at a low degree and will create a mixed state. The 10th house is that of career and success. It is also the house of desires. Mars is at 0 degrees here and is thus weak in the chart. Technically, he is the foundation of this 4-planet conjunction. However, he is far removed from it, so the core of the conjunction will be Venus, Jupiter, and Sun. This conjunction reflects a passion for the worldly, especially in the 10th house of career and success. It is an egotistical energy that takes pride in creation. Because it is in Gemini, this can be seen not only through intellectual efforts, but practical matters of working with one's hands as well. We see this in the fact that America holds more patents than any other country, and it has been the innovator in the past of technology, both mechanical and electronic. This is also the country which invented mass media. Mars. A weak Mars means a planet that has to prove itself and will start quarrels, as already noted. He is also in an enemy sign. Mars here can give good problem-solving abilities, but being negatively placed, he will generate verbal aggression and cynicism. He will speak his mind without a filter and create problems. Because this is the 10th house of career, Mars can be too forceful, and he will also create debt. Because this is Gemini, his workplace aggression will be more verbal, and he will create debts which are related to commerce. Mars is in Mrigashira Nakshatra, which is his own, so this will give a more positive bouncing effect to him and give a stronger effect for this nakshatra. Mars here is going to want to go on the hunt and aggressively pursue his goals. This can also give an emphasis on competitive sports, which are certainly a large source of success, career, and prominent in the national psyche. Venus. Venus is in a friend's sign and receiving aspects from his friend Saturn, but he is conjunct with his enemy, the Sun. His position is mixed, but on the positive side. He is just at 10 degrees from the Sun and is on the border of combustion. Venus in the 10th house will tend to bring qualities which are a countervailing force to the Martian influence. His effects are economic comfort and luxury in a desire to have a better financial decisions and planning for the long term. What this means is that there will be a tension and alteration between these two energies, although generally Venus will tend to be stronger. Thus, there will be transits where Mars will have these ascendancies over the national life, and times where Venus will more hold sway. The lunar mansion of Arda, ruled by Rahu and bringing his influence into play, is where Venus is sitting. Venus will make one versatile and popular, as well as give a strong influence to women. Jupiter. Jupiter is 8 degrees from the Sun, and as mentioned elsewhere, he is combust. The effect of this is to create a Jupiter which believes he is always right and knows what is best for everyone, so just listen and do what he says. We see this impetus reflected in both American Christian fundamentalism as well as many left-wing activists. Additionally, Jupiter is in an enemy sign, which will also serve to agitate matters. Jupiter is sitting in the lunar asterism of Arda with Venus. Arda will impart to Jupiter wisdom, but the nature of this nakshatra is to give Jupiter problems with women. Because he is so close to Venus, who is producing an opposite effect, this is going to generate tension in these views and in this area. Because this is in the 10th house, this will often relate to career, but it can be seen in other areas as well, especially the 4th house, that of the home and mother, because this conjunction is so strongly aspecting that placement. While I personally do not care for abortion, in that long-standing debate on this subject, one can see this as just one example of this tension manifested in the society. The Gemini influence is not only emphasizing this duality, but this can unfold predominantly through mass media and communication. The immature Mars also sheds his influence on the matter. Since this is stemming from Rahu, he is in there stirring the pot from behind, which can reflect, by the way, manipulation of this issue, because Rahu is manipulation. Sun. The Sun here is in an enemy sign and receiving an aspect from his enemy Saturn. But in Gemini's dual nature, he can be alternately progressive and reactionary, stubborn and open. Inconsistency will be a persistent trait because of Gemini's dual nature and the agitations which the Sun is experiencing. Transits and aspects will create and heighten different manifestations of this as the Sun moves through the chart and the dashas. Being in the 10th house reflects authority in business and government. Purvanasu Nakshatra, where the Sun sits, will tend to make him famous and generous. Even in bad situations, the Sun will always shine through and here basically do what's right and for the best over time. Because this house is the natural indicator of Jupiter and the Sun, this will help to palliate their negative effects somewhat here. The aspect of Saturn here on a friend sign, Mercury, can serve to bring a stable and hard-working energy from the first house into play in these areas of career and success. That is a more general influence. In particular, Saturn will support his friend Venus, and he may cast a shadow over the Sun and Mars, which are already annoyed enough, even if that may not be that large. The construct of this house is, as noted, all having a strong aspect on the 4th house through aspects. Here, the ruler of the 12th house is in the 10th house, which is Sun. This will generate charitable activities, and being in Leo, especially those from government and large corporations. It should be pointed out that the United States government provides most of the food aid to the world. Also, statistically, no people give as much to charity as Americans do. On the negative side of this can create periods where it is hard to make a living. The ruler of the ninth house is in the 10th house, which is Venus. This can give wealth from career, and with Venus, the ability to have good business acumen. This will also create, on its negative side, destructive spending habits, making bad decisions to gain luxury items with funds one does not have, in other words, credit, and having an overzealousness of philosophy and religion. Being Venus, this may be reflected in racist views, or the opposite of an over-idealization of other people. Ruler of the 8th house in the 10th house, Mars. This will generate the use of secretive or mysterious means to advance career. Because this is Mars, who is the significator of real estate, this may mean tricks in stealing land. This may also refer to covert military means acting in secret to advance the national economic agenda. I'm put in mind of the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins. Ruler of the 4th in the 10th, Jupiter. The ruler of the 4th house is combust, and this will lead to an arrogant attitude towards all things which are symbolic of the mother, both the physical land herself and the roles of females in the country. This could be read as a powerful and negative influence also of specific families. Being Jupiter, they would be wealthy, who arrogantly attempt to control matters of the 4th house, meaning the life of the nation. It can also manifest as possibly an arrogant patriotism. All of these have been trends, of course, which are manifest in American history, both past and present. The 11th house in this chart is the sign of Cancer. Mercury, the ascendant lord, is placed here at 3 degrees, and Rahu, the north node of the moon, at 16 degrees. The ruler of this house is the moon. He is neutrally placed in Aquarius. This is ruled by Saturn, which is well placed on the ascendant, so this will be a strong house. The focus of the 11th house is gains. A secondary factor in this house is network circles, since this is how one gains in this world. Cancer itself is a water sign with a strong emotional and nurturing quality. Cancer is ruled by the moon, and Mercury is the enemy of the moon. This means that Mercury is not well placed here, but there are other factors helping him, as we shall see. In the conjunction of Mercury and Rahu, Mercury holds the lowest degree and is the foundation of this relationship. The effect of this conjunction can be summarized basically as unconventional speech. If we think of the world in which the Declaration of Independence, which was declared on this day, was made, this is certainly the case. Because he is conjunct the ascendant lord in this chart, it also means that Rahu will be playing a prominent role. Since Rahu is what we are here to focus on this life, on a national level, this will create a strong sense of destiny or fate in the national character. Mercury is value neutral and fluid, acting like who he is with, so it also means that Rahu's desires to take shortcuts to succeed at any cost and his mastery of illusion will be playing large roles. Mercury is at a low degree and is a weak planet in the chart. This affects not only his ability to act in the chart, but it can mean that he is even more unstable and variable. His results will shift then, and there will be much more swings between his positive and negative effects as he transit. This is reinforced because the natural indicator of this house is his enemy Jupiter. These factors may give Mercury, a more volatile quality. However, the ascendant lord is considered well placed in this house, so this may help to alleviate some of his inauspiciousness in transits through the chart. Mercury in the 11th house can make one clever with opportunities and profits. However, poorly placed, it can make one adhere to bad advice and manage finances illogically. Because it is in the sign of the moon and emotions, this may create an impetus to manage these affairs based on emotions, which could be greed or misplaced compassion. The positive and negative effects of Mercury will fluctuate. Mercury is in the lunar mansion of Pushya, which is the star of enlightenment, and is ruled by Saturn. Saturn, being well placed in the chart, will give a positive influence through this nakshatra. This is an excellent lunar asterism under which to start a new enterprise, such as a country, especially if the ascendant lord is there, which, he is. So this will palliate some of the negative placements of Mercury in Cancer and cast a positive light over the country. Saturn will also impart to him stability. Remember, Saturn is on the ascendant, the first house, so he is already prominent in this chart. This is another way, I should say, he's influencing the ascendant lord from the background. Rahu in Cancer is considered, from what I have learned, a favorable position. It gives a desire for progress which may better the home environment. This can inspire politicians or activists with wide public appeal, as this is a national chart, and will be intent on protecting the country, even if using manipulative means to do it, which is part of Rahu's influence. There are hints of the highly aspected fourth house in this. On the shadow side, it can increase cravings for security based on imaginary fears. An example of this would be in the colonial era and for a period after the revolution, in the fear that the Pope was plotting to take over the country. Rahu here can be overly emotional, and he can create illusionary displays of emotion which hide his real agenda, often influenced by Mercury in the chart or business. We see this reflected in war propaganda. For example, the story hyped that Saddam Hussein's sons threw babies out of incubators, or during the First World War, the stories that the Germans tossed up Belgian babies and caught them on their bayonets. All of these were false, manipulative propaganda, which was, of course, an example of Rahu in Cancer. Rahu here is going to amplify the qualities of the sign of the moon because this is where he is placed, as well, since he is the ruler of the sign. Because the moon is in Aquarius, it may indicate that Rahu will use either reformist or individualistic rhetoric in his manipulations of the public, as well as these emotional matters that we've seen. This manipulation may not always have an ill intent, it should be said, or there may be multiple agendas involved. While commerce or Mercury may be a motivation with Rahu for his manipulation, because this is Cancer, this will not be admitted. So if there's a war, in the examples of the propaganda that we've seen, there will have to be some emotional aspect of it to justify it and make it acceptable to the public. Rahu here in the 11th house will make one innovative and shrewd with profits and opportunities. Rahu can make you rich. This is harmonious with Mercury's effects on this house, so they are working off of each other and continually building up their effect as time passes. It can also generate profits from friends, and especially foreign friends, which in this chart would be considered countries and allies. The shadow planet is in the lunar asterism of Ashlesha, which is ruled by Mercury, which even more closely binds the energies of these two planets. Ashlesha people are said to have snake eyes because the ruling deities of this asterism are the Nagas, which are snake therianthropes in Hindu lore. This, of course, relates to Rahu, which is the snake planet, or at least the head of it. This can create anxiety as well as craftiness as a tendency to lie when it's useful. I can think of lots of recent examples of that on the national scale. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. Weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Mrs. Lewinsky. Read my lips. No new taxes. Well, it could go on. On the positive side, Rahu through this nakshatra can give charisma. In this house, the ruler of the first house is in the 11th. On the positive side, this can create a strong cash flow and profits from a wide range of opportunities. This puts me in mind of the United States bond market, which is the largest in the world, that you can buy a bond, you can put in a bond, exchange it, and get cash. On the negative side, when Mercury's negative side comes out, this will create the opposite of all of these. So it can constrict opportunities and create problems with the cash flow. The 12th house in this chart is the sign of Leo. The sun rules this house, and the sun is placed in an enemy sign and conjunct with an enemy's. He also has minimal support from his friend Mars. The 12th house is that which is hidden and is here ruled by the sun. So thus, those things which are hidden may very probably relate to politics, the government, and large corporations. That the sun is in an enemy sign means that these are negative shenanigans which these two solar manifestations are concealing. No surprise there. Another effect of the sun with a negative inflection in this house is that the kindness of the nation may be interpreted as weakness. This is something which many Americans actually feel and find frustrating. The moon is looking at this house, and this relates to the last point. The Aquarian moon will bring an inflection of humanitarianism and volunteerism in this sign and house. One way this is manifest is that the American federal government disperses a tremendous amount of food aid globally, as has been mentioned. This is the aspect of the moon on the political sphere in Leo. However, because this is the 12th house, it means that there is a hidden aspect to this. So there could be hidden agendas which are, of course, tied to this. Naturally, that's the case. Everything is not done from pure compassion or altruism. Because the moon is in a house of Saturn, and Saturn is the natural indicator of the 12th house, there is some amplification of those effects here. He will bring a stable and conservative influence into this house on these matters through that. So that concludes my analysis on all of these points, looking at them through American history and looking at them through current politics. There are a legion of examples which could be cited, dissected, and certainly much more to explore on the subject. That is especially true since I am using only the most basic means. I certainly invite commentary and criticism, and I would be very curious for any reflections which people may have as to how these have been manifested through American history. I am also curious how those who are not Americans and may often wonder about our sometimes strange national psyche, what they might think of this. Thank you very much, and goodbye.